$50,000. The number echoed across the wide, sun-bleached hills of Lone Pine Ranch, carried by the crackling speakers and the collective murmur of disbelief. Frank Dalton stood tall on the wooden platform, his voice gritty from decades of war, smoke, and Wyoming dust. His weathered hand tightened on the old microphone like it was the last weapon in his arsenal. 1 minute on that horse's back. He paused, letting the crowd lean in, letting the weight of the challenge settle deep in their bones. And the money's yours. A ripple of nervous laughter rolled through the scattered groups clustered near the arena fence. Some shook their heads, others whispered, all eyes drawn inevitably to the center of the corral, where the black silhouette of Midnight Echo prowled like a shadow ripped from hell itself. The stallion's coat shimmered under the noon sun, an impossible, oil-slick black that seemed to drink in the light. His muscular frame coiled with tension, every step deliberate, eyes sharp as glass. A thin white blaze sliced down his face, the only mark on an otherwise midnight canvas. Frank's gaze never wavered. He'd poured every damn cent he had left into that horse, into this gamble, into the last desperate swing to keep Lone Pine alive. But as he stared at Midnight Echo, something old and raw stirred in his chest, not hope, but memory, and ghosts. They called him the Black Demon. The legend stretched from military outposts to whispered barroom stories across the Rockies. Midnight Echo wasn't bred for rodeos or ranch work. He came from darker stock, a classified government program that tried, in its arrogance, to turn wild horses into war machines. Frank remembered the files, the secrecy, the rumors of experimental training camps buried deep in the Utah desert. Midnight Echo had been the crown jewel, the one they couldn't break, couldn't cage, until the accident, the deaths, the cover-up, and the horse that vanished, leaving nothing but wreckage in his wake. Frank had found him at a backwater auction 2 states over. No paperwork, no history, just that look in his eyes. A dare, a challenge, the same look Frank had seen staring back at him in rusted mirrors since Fallujah. Luke, his son, had called him insane. "We're broke, Dad," Luke had snapped weeks ago, slamming financial reports on the kitchen table. "You dumped everything into that monster, and for what? Some damn cowboy sideshow?" Frank hadn't answered. Not then. His pride wouldn't let him. But as Lone Pine's debts mounted, as the banks circled, as the fences rusted and the cattle thinned, the choice became clear. Go down, quiet, forgotten, or go down swinging. He chose the latter. The ranchers, the tourists, the drifters, they all showed up for the spectacle today. But Frank knew what really dragged them here, the hunger to see the untamable conquered, to witness a legend bleed. His voice cut back through the speakers, sharp and unyielding. No ropes, no saddles, no tricks. You last 60 seconds on Midnight Echo, the money's yours, and I throw in a Lone Pine colt. The crowd stirred, the promise heavy, electric. Mike Rivers approached the platform, his limp pronounced, the sun catching the silver in his beard. His voice was low, weathered from too many years as Frank's sniper in the sandbox. "You sure about this, old man?" Frank's jaw tightened. "It's this, or watch Lone Pine rot." Mike spat in the dirt, his eyes flicking to the stallion. "That horse isn't normal." Frank almost laughed. Bitter, tired. Neither are we. The truth was, Midnight Echo terrified him. Not just his size, or the bone-snapping power in his frame, but what the horse represented. A reflection of every ounce of rage, survival, and refusal to kneel that Frank had carried home from the war. The government broke soldiers. It broke animals. It broke men like Frank. But some things learned to bite back. He'd bet the ranch on that. By late afternoon, the crowd had swelled. Trucks lined the dirt roads, news vans rolled in from Cheyenne, and kids hoisted homemade signs, "Ride the Demon, Win Big." Frank watched it all with clenched fists, the weight of legacy, failure, and stubborn hope pressing against his ribs. The announcer's voice cracked over the speakers again, full of bravado. "Step right up, cowboys. Let's see if anyone's got what it takes." Frank stayed quiet, eyes locked on Midnight Echo, the black stallion's muscles rippling like a storm brewing beneath his skin. Behind him, Mike's words returned, low and loaded. "Some demons. You don't ride, Frank. You survive 'em." Frank didn't answer. He couldn't. The fate of Lone Pine Ranch, his family name, and every scar he carried would be decided in that arena. The bets were made. The gate creaked open. The reckoning had begun. The morning sun burned off the Wyoming haze fast, turning the dirt lot of Lone Pine Ranch into a sprawling amphitheater of sweat, dust, and rising expectation. By 10 o'clock, you couldn't find a patch of shade that wasn't already claimed by someone in a trucker cap or leaning against a fence rail, eyes squinting toward the arena. They came from everywhere. Cowboys in battered boots from Amarillo, rodeo champions out of Nevada, stunt riders from the Colorado circuit, and even a few grizzled old-timers who looked like they hadn't dismounted a horse since Vietnam. And they all came for one thing: Midnight Echo. The Black Demon paced the corral like a coiled storm, his obsidian coat shimmering in the brutal sun, muscles rippling with an energy that dared any man to test him. His eyes were sharp, calculating, watching, always watching. Frank Dalton stood near the announcer's booth, arms crossed tight over his chest, jaw like granite. His face bore the lines of a man who'd fought wars both overseas and at home. But nothing in Fallujah, or the boardrooms with bankers, prepared him for this kind of scrutiny. The bleachers groaned under the weight of eager spectators. Camera crews set up along the rails. Vendors hawked overpriced burgers and Lone Pine t-shirts, emblazoned with "Ride the Demon if you dare" across the back. 50 grand sat in a locked briefcase on display near the announcer's stand, flanked by 2 ranch hands like it was Fort Knox itself. Mike Rivers leaned against a fence post beside Frank, chewing on a toothpick, his eyes shaded under a faded ball cap. "Whole damn state showed up," he muttered, scanning the crowd. "Good," Frank replied, voice low and tight. "Let 'em see what legends are made of." "Or broken," Mike added under his breath. The first contender strutted toward the arena gate just past noon. Buck Tannen, a broad-shouldered Texan with a rodeo belt buckle the size of a dinner plate. His reputation for taming rank bulls and broncs preceded him. Didn't matter. 2 seconds after mounting Midnight Echo, the stallion spun like a hurricane. Buck hit the dirt so hard his Stetson flew one way and his dignity the other. The crowd roared with shock and a morbid sort of glee. Second up was Carlos Mendez from New Mexico, lean, wiry, known for his skill with wild mustangs. He lasted 7 seconds before Midnight Echo bucked him clean over the rail, his body thudding into the dust as medics scrambled. By the fourth rider, a Utah-born Hollywood stuntman with credits on every Western film in the last decade, the mood shifted. No longer amusement. Now it was awe, fear. The horse wasn't just winning. He was toying with them. Whispers crept through the crowd like wildfire. "You see that? He didn't even flinch. That's not a horse, man. That's a damn devil. I heard he killed a handler in some government program." Frank kept his face impassive, but his insides twisted with every fall. Not from concern for the riders, they signed the waivers, but from the gnawing realization that his last gamble was slipping through his fingers. If no one lasted 60 seconds, The money stayed with him, sure. But Lone Pine's reputation? His reputation? Gone. And with it, the slim chance to save this place from foreclosure. The fifth rider didn't even get in the saddle. Midnight. Echo snapped his teeth so close to the man's leg that he backed off, pale and shaking, muttering, "Ain't no paycheck worth that." Frank's knuckles whitened on the fence rail. Across the corral, Luke Dalton approached, face flushed with anger, jaw clenched tight enough to crack. "This is a goddamn circus, Dad," Luke hissed under his breath, sidling up beside him. "You see what's happening out there? You turned Lone Pine into a laughingstock." Frank didn't look away from the ring. "It's not over." "It should be," Luke shot back. His voice held the weight of months of frustration. The foreclosure letters, the arguments, the sleepless nights. "We've got bills stacked to the ceiling. You spent what little we had left chasing some ghost story about a horse that can't be broken." Frank finally turned, his eyes hard, unyielding. "You think I don't know what's at stake? You think I bought that horse for kicks?" Luke's gaze narrowed. "You bought him because you can't let go of the war, of control, of this place. You're drowning, and you're dragging Lone Pine under with you." The words hit harder than any fall off a bronc. Before Frank could answer, the loudspeaker crackled, snapping their attention back to the ring. "All right, folks," the announcer boomed, forced enthusiasm barely masking the tension. "Looks like we've run out of brave souls, unless there's anyone else willing to take a shot at glory." Silence. The crowd shifted, murmured, but no one stepped forward. Midnight, Echo pawed at the dirt, snorted, his black mane whipping like smoke in the wind. Untouched, undefeated. The humiliation settled like a storm cloud over Frank's shoulders. Mike sidled closer, voice low. "We call it, before someone gets hurt worse." Frank's throat worked. His pride screamed to push on, but his gut twisted with the sting of reality. The crowd buzzed, the whispers louder now. Waste of time. Should have stayed home. Demon horse wins again. The ranch's fate balanced on the edge of collapse. Then, a voice cut clean through the noise. "I'll ride him." It wasn't loud, but the confidence in the words sliced through the arena like a blade. Heads turned. At the south gate, a woman stepped forward. Tall, lean, walking with a faint but unmistakable limp. Her dark braid fell over one shoulder. A plain white shirt rolled to the elbows, faded jeans scuffed from long travel. But it wasn't her clothes that silenced the crowd. It was the tattoo on her forearm, stark against sun-kissed skin. The unmistakable insignia of the U.S. Special Forces. The whispers rippled like thunder now. "Who the hell's that? She's military." Crazy, maybe. Frank stared, pulse hammering against his ribs. His fists tightened, his instincts screaming warning, recognition, and something older, more dangerous, twisting beneath the surface. The woman didn't wait for permission. She walked toward the ring, and everything at Lone Pine shifted. The silence that swallowed Lone Pine Ranch in the wake of her words was so dense, it felt like even the prairie wind held its breath, as if the earth itself leaned closer to listen, caught between disbelief and the magnetic pull of watching someone willingly walk straight into the jaws of a legend that had humiliated every man before her. Lauren Carter moved across the dusty arena floor with the calm precision of someone who understood danger, not as theory, but as a language etched into the scars beneath her skin, her left leg dragging slightly with each step, the limp subtle yet undeniable, a quiet marker of the battles life had refused to let her forget. The crowd rippled with uneasy murmurs as she approached, eyes darting from the Special Forces tattoo branded onto her forearm to the defiant tilt of her chin, sizing her up not as entertainment, but as a riddle that didn't belong here. A woman alone, unarmed, walking straight toward Midnight Echo like she wasn't stepping onto sacred, dangerous ground. Frank Dalton stood rigid by the fence rail, every muscle in his weathered frame locked tight with the unmistakable tension of a man teetering between pride, confusion, and a creeping sense of recognition he couldn't yet name, his sharp gaze tracking the woman's approach with the same caution he'd once reserved for insurgents in the blacked-out alleys of Fallujah. Mike Rivers, never one for theatrics, leaned in close, voice pitched low and laced with quiet warning. "You know her?" His eyes narrowed beneath the brim of his ball cap, the faint ghost of old military instinct flickering behind his steady stare. Frank shook his head once, his jaw clenching as the weight of the situation pressed heavier against his ribs. "No," he muttered, though the word didn't carry the conviction it should have, his pulse quickening for reasons that had nothing to do with the spectacle unfolding in the ring. Midnight Echo pawed at the ground, nostrils flaring, coal dark muscles rippling beneath his sleek coat, the raw, predatory energy rolling off him so thick it rippled through the fence line, his wild eyes fixed on the approaching stranger with an intelligence that sent shivers crawling down spines across the arena. Lauren stopped several feet short of the stallion, her posture relaxed yet impossibly steady, the kind of presence that came not from bravado, but from the deep, lived-in knowledge of what it meant to face down impossible odds and walk away carrying the weight of them etched across your bones. The crowd, eager for blood moments ago, had fallen into a hushed awe, the previous jeers fading to whispers as the impossible began to shift toward reality. Frank stepped forward, boots grinding against the dusty earth, his voice cutting across the heavy stillness with the sharp edge of authority worn down by decades of battlefields and bad decisions. "Ma'am, I don't know what you think you're doing, but this ain't a joke. And that horse, he's not just angry, he's dangerous." Lauren's gaze flicked to him, steady as the mountain horizon, her expression unreadable but carrying a quiet gravity that silenced even the boldest skeptic. "I know exactly how dangerous he is," she said, her voice smooth, low, threaded with steel, "because I helped make him that way." A ripple of disbelief passed through the crowd, like the first crack of thunder before a storm breaks loose. Frank's eyes narrowed, his mind working fast to process the impossible meaning behind her words. A knot forming in his chest that had nothing to do with the ranch or his pride, but with the growing sense that the past, the one he'd tried to outrun, bury under cattle and stubborn will, was about to claw its way to the surface. Lauren took another step, slow, deliberate, ignoring the gasps from the bleachers, her focus locked entirely on Midnight Echo, whose ears twitched toward her, head lowering fractionally, as if tasting the electric hum of something familiar wrapped in her scent. "I was Special Operations," she continued, her voice carrying over the arena without strain, each word measured, heavy with memory. "South America, classified unit. We trained horses for tactical warfare, fast, silent, responsive. Midnight Echo wasn't bred for show or sport, he was built for war." The revelation rippled through the crowd, fragments of half-whispered rumors and military conspiracy theories colliding with the living, breathing embodiment of them standing in the ring. Mike exhaled slowly, his gaze darting to Frank, both of them piecing together the jagged edges of a truth neither wanted to face. Lauren's hand hovered near her side, fingers loose, body language quiet yet anchored with an unshakable confidence born not from arrogance, but from surviving when survival wasn't guaranteed. "We thought we could control him. We were wrong," she said, her tone darkening with the echo of buried ghosts. "After Columbia, after the ambush, Echo escaped. The program was buried, the files sealed. They told us to forget. The ache in her words threaded through the arena like a slow-moving storm, heavy with the weight of classified regrets and lives lost to the illusion of control. Midnight. Echo shifted, his muscles tightening as if remembering the same ghosts that haunted her, his wild eyes softening, the recognition unmistakable. I didn't come here to break him. Lauren's voice dropped to a near whisper, carried more by conviction than volume. I came to free him, because I know what it means to be caged, to be turned into a weapon, to lose yourself. The crowd hung on every word, the jeering, the bravado of the morning washed away by the raw, human truth unraveling before them. Without waiting for permission, Lauren began to hum, a low, melodic tune that slipped through the heavy air like smoke curling around forgotten memories. The language was ancient, older than the fences and the politics, a Cherokee lullaby passed down from generations that remembered wild horses as symbols of freedom, not tools of war. The song wrapped around the arena, threading through the bleachers, sliding under the boots of hardened cowboys and grizzled war veterans alike, turning skeptics into believers, if only for a breathless moment. Midnight Echo's posture shifted, the taut defiance in his frame melting into measured curiosity, his hooves stepping cautiously toward the woman whose song stirred something long buried within him. The arena watched, stunned, as Lauren extended her hand, not as a command, but as an invitation, her palm steady, open, unafraid. Midnight Echo closed the distance, his massive head lowering, muzzle brushing against her fingers with the tentative grace of a creature rediscovering trust after lifetimes of betrayal. A collective exhale swept the stands, the impossible made real. Lauren's eyes softened, her voice threading through the space between them, meant only for the horse and the ghosts they shared. I didn't come to tame you, she whispered, her touch feather-light on his cheek. I came to remind you. You were never meant to be controlled. And for the first time in Lone Pine Ranch's long, complicated history, the untamable black demon stood still, not conquered, but understood. The crowd didn't cheer, they couldn't. The moment was too fragile, too profound. Frank's hands trembled against the rail, his throat tight with unspoken fears, regrets, and the creeping suspicion that this woman, this soldier with old scars and older secrets, wasn't finished rewriting everything he thought he knew. Because as Lauren swung effortlessly onto Midnight Echo's back, no saddle, no bridle, only the thin thread of mutual understanding between them, she looked directly at Frank, her eyes blazing with something fierce, ancient, and impossibly familiar. And in that charged, impossible instant, Frank Dalton realized the past wasn't just coming for him, it had already arrived, and it carried his blood. The dusty haze of late afternoon still lingered, like a veil over Lone Pine Ranch, casting long, amber shadows across the paddocks and weathered fences. Yet not a soul among the 100 spectators dared move, as if they feared the moment between horse and woman might shatter if they so much as shifted their weight. Midnight. Echo stood silent in the center of the arena, his ebony coat shimmering under the fractured sunlight. His massive head bowed slightly beside Lauren Carter, as if acknowledging something far older than applause. Something older even than the legacy of this land. The crowd, moments ago wild with disbelief, had dissolved into hushed reverence, their wide eyes locked on the impossible scene before them. Yet, beneath that surface of awe, questions swirled like storm clouds over the distant ridges. Who was this woman? What spell had she cast to quiet the devil horse that no man, not even the most hardened rider from Texas to Nevada, could touch without tasting dust and humiliation. Frank Dalton's fingers curled tight over the rough wood of the fence rail, his knuckles bone-white beneath weathered skin marked by decades of sun and war. His chest tightened, not with anger or pride, but with the kind of gnawing, unsettled recognition that coils deep in your gut when the past you buried starts clawing its way back to life, dragging old truths behind it like chains. She hadn't spoken since those haunting words whispered to the stallion, the declaration that she had not come to break him, but to free him. And yet every breath in the arena hung on her next move as she slid gracefully from Midnight Echo's back, landing lightly despite the subtle hitch in her left leg, that old battlefield limp betraying the quiet strength beneath her stillness. The horse didn't bolt. He didn't rear or lash out. He remained beside her, unmoving, watchful, as if tethered not by rope, but by the fragile thread of shared history only they could comprehend. Mike Rivers shifted beside Frank, the faint rustle of his faded jacket loud against the silence, his eyes narrowing with the sharp, calculating gaze of a sniper who'd seen his share of men bluff and bleed. "Frank," he muttered, his voice low and rough as gravel. "I've seen ghosts show up in uglier ways, but I'm telling you, that one's dragging more than scars." Frank's jaw clenched tighter, the old instinct to shut down, to command order, to shove back at the chaos clawing toward him flickering across his features, but it was drowned out by the sound of Lauren's boots crunching softly over the arena sand as she turned, eyes locking onto his with an intensity that stripped the years from his frame and rooted him to the earth like a sapling facing a wildfire. "I think it's time we talk," she said simply, but her words landed with the weight of artillery shells, drawing every eye toward them, silencing even the restless murmurs creeping through the crowd like dry grass waiting for a spark. Frank forced himself to step forward, the dry Wyoming wind tugging at his flannel shirt, the lines of his face deepening beneath the brim of his sun-bleached Stetson as he crossed the arena floor. Every pace toward Lauren feeling heavier than the last, his boots grinding against the dirt that had been his inheritance, his battlefield, and his sanctuary. They stopped only a few feet apart, the air between them thick with history neither had yet named. "You're military," Frank stated, though the words felt brittle in his mouth, stripped of accusation, woven instead with reluctant acknowledgement. Lauren nodded once, her dark braid brushing against her shoulder, the faintest curve of exhaustion etched into the edges of her determined jawline. "Was Special Operations, South America. They sent us to tame the wild, but they forgot the wild doesn't bleed easy." Her gaze flicked to Midnight Echo, who stood quietly behind her, his flanks rising and falling in a steady rhythm that mirrored the storm brewing beneath her steady exterior. "He was part of that program. We thought we could weaponize instinct, break the unbreakable, turn creatures like him into shadows that answered to orders." Frank's heart twisted, the weight of her words crashing against the faded memories of desert firefights and classified missions, of how the military chewed through men and beasts alike, then buried the remains beneath polished metals and convenient lies. Lauren's voice softened, but it carried a dangerous edge, the kind born from betrayal layered over grief. "It went bad. Colombia. You've probably heard whispers. A unit wiped out, buried under redacted reports and false flags." Her fingers grazed the hem of her rolled-up sleeve, tracing the faint scar that bisected her tattoo. "Echo escaped. I barely made it out. The brass scrubbed the whole operation, but they never killed the file completely." The crowd buzzed, whispers darting through the air like startled birds as fragments of conspiracy unraveled at their feet. But Frank's mind had locked onto something deeper, something that reached past military secrets and straight into the marrow of his bones. the way Lauren's eyes, that sharp green-blue, mirrored a face he'd only ever seen in the haunting corners of memory. "You're not just here for the horse," he said, the realization blooming slowly, heavily, like storm clouds rolling in over the open plains. Lauren hesitated, the walls she'd held firm cracking just enough to reveal the raw, aching truth beneath. "No," she admitted, the single syllable laced with enough weight to buckle a weaker man's knees. "I'm here because of you." Frank's pulse thundered in his ears as the puzzle pieces slammed into place, jagged edges slicing through the denial he'd worn like armor for decades, fragments of a life left behind, a war zone rendezvous, a woman with Cherokee eyes and wildfire spirit, a name he'd whispered in the dark and lost to time. "My mother was Lily Carter," Lauren continued, the name detonating in Frank's chest like a buried landmine, his breath faltering as the years between past and present dissolved. "You left her before you even knew I existed. She never told you." Her voice cracked slightly, the steel still there but layered now with old wounds resurfacing. "She raised me alone, off the grid, proud, stubborn, just like you." The world tilted, the ground beneath Frank's boots shifting in ways even decades of battle hadn't prepared him for as the impossible truth settled like dust in his lungs. This woman, the soldier with the haunted eyes, the one who calmed the devil horse with nothing but presence and song, was his daughter. The crowd watched, wide-eyed and breathless, sensing the undercurrent of revelation though they couldn't yet grasp its full depth. Frank's throat tightened around words he couldn't yet shape, his gaze drifting toward Midnight Echo, standing steady as stone beside Lauren, his wildness tempered not by force, but by choice, an echo of everything this moment demanded. "You came for the horse," Frank finally rasped, his voice raw, brittle, "but you stayed because you knew." Lauren nodded, the fragile edges of their fractured history stitching slowly together beneath the bruised Wyoming sky. "I stayed because family isn't about blood alone. It's about fighting for what matters, and maybe saving what we can before it's too late." In the uneasy quiet that followed, Frank understood. Lone Pine Ranch was more than a legacy hanging by a thread. It was a battlefield for redemption, a chance to heal old wounds, and the hardest truth yet. He wasn't the only Dalton forged by war and loss, and as the setting sun bled gold across the horizon, casting long shadows over the dirt, the fences, and the battered arena, the undeniable, fragile beginning of something new settled over them. Fathers, daughters, wild horses, and all the ghosts in between. The Wyoming dusk had a way of softening even the hardest outlines. The jagged peaks silhouetted against a bruised purple sky, the weather-beaten fences of Lone Pine Ranch casting long, uncertain shadows across the sun-baked earth, and the stubborn lines etched deep into Frank Dalton's face, lines carved by years of war, loss, and the kind of pride that refused to yield even when everything else did. But tonight, as the porch light flickered softly overhead and the horizon bled gold into ash, that pride no longer stood alone. Frank sat at the edge of the wooden steps, the grit of the earth cool beneath his boots, his shoulders heavy with the weight of the impossible day now trailing behind him like old battle scars finally exposed to the air. His eyes drifted across the paddocks, where the silhouette of Midnight Echo moved slow and untethered through the tall grass. Each step of the black stallion steady, unchained, and, for the first time in his damn life, utterly at ease. Beside him, Luke Dalton leaned against the porch rail, arms crossed tight over his chest, the faintest trace of resentment still etched in the taut line of his jaw, though the fight in his posture had dulled, replaced by something more complex. A tangled mess of frustration, awe and the gnawing uncertainty that came when the world you thought you understood cracked wide open in front of 500 strangers. Inside the house, Emily's soft voice drifted faintly through the screen door, her calm words grounding the ranch hands still buzzing with questions, doubts, and cautious hope. But out here beneath the Wyoming twilight, it was only father and son, both of them quiet, both of them waiting. The words, when they finally came, scraped low and rough from Luke's throat, his frustration barely tempered by exhaustion. "You gonna tell me why you kept that from me? A sister? 30-something years out there thinking I was your only shot at legacy. And meanwhile..." Frank let the accusation settle, the weight of it undeniable, but his gaze never wavered from Midnight Echo, the stallion's dark form a reminder of all the wild things no one could own. Not a horse, not a child, not regret buried beneath years of silence. "It wasn't my choice to make," Frank finally muttered, his voice frayed at the edges, stripped of the usual defiance that once guarded every damn word that left his mouth. "Lily, she made her own calls, same as I did back then. War, hell, it carves up more than battlefields. I didn't know about Lauren. Didn't know she existed till she showed up here and tamed the only creature on this damn ranch more stubborn than me." Luke's jaw clenched, his gaze hard, but beneath it simmered something quieter. A reluctant understanding, shaped not by forgiveness, but by the simple truth that life, messy and brutal as it was, rarely handed out clean resolutions. "And now what?" Luke asked, voice low, the frustration sharpened by exhaustion. "We keep the ranch? Let the tourists keep betting who gets tossed first? You really think parading that horse around is enough to save Lone Pine?" Frank exhaled slowly, the dry wind cutting through the quiet, carrying the faint scent of dust, pine, and distant rain, his eyes tracing the silhouette of Lauren where she stood beside Midnight Echo, her posture calm, her presence a quiet defiance of everything the world had tried and failed to break in her. "We don't save Lone Pine by breaking what's left of it," Frank answered, the admission heavy but clear, his words threaded with the unfamiliar weight of humility long overdue. "We save it by rebuilding, different this time, not with rope and spurs but with patience, with damn respect for what we've all been too proud to face." Luke's brow furrowed, skepticism curling at the edges of his expression, but his gaze softened as he followed his father's line of sight toward Lauren, the woman who had unraveled decades of legend, fear, and pride in one impossible afternoon. "And you trust her?" Luke asked, quieter now, the edges of doubt still present, but dulled by something dangerously close to hope. Frank's answer came without hesitation, steady as the Wyoming earth beneath them. "She tamed that horse without a rope, without a damn ounce of force. I figure that counts for something more than legacy or blood." The porch creaked as Emily stepped outside, her eyes bright beneath the porch light, her expression carrying the same grounded resolve that had steadied the Daltons longer than either man cared to admit. She handed Frank a folded sheet of paper, the latest offer from the out-of-state developers itching to buy Lone Pine Ranch for a fraction of its worth, their promises laced with corporate gloss and the quiet destruction of everything this land had ever stood for. Frank turned the paper over in his hands, his grip tightening, the edges crumpling beneath the weight of his decision. Beside the barn, Lauren approached, Midnight Echo trailing behind her, with the quiet, measured steps of a creature no longer trapped between defiance and fear, but simply existing, finally, as he was meant to, free. Lauren stopped at the foot of the steps, her expression unreadable beneath the brim of her cap, but her eyes carried no demands, only an invitation, the same quiet strength she had offered the stallion hours before. The same fragile thread of possibility now extended toward the fractured remains of this family. "You have a choice," Lauren said softly, her voice carrying across the fading light, weaving through the brittle air heavy with old ghosts and new beginnings. "Sell the ranch. Let it die with the stories folks tell after they're done picking it apart. Or let me stay. Let me teach them, your hands, your neighbors. Let me show 'em there's another way to work with these animals, with this land, without breaking what's wild in the process." Her words hovered, fragile but undeniable, a reflection of the same lesson etched into Midnight Echo's quiet presence beside her, a testament to what could happen when pride stepped aside for understanding. Frank studied her for a long, stretched moment, the weight of the ranch's future, of legacy, blood, regret, and fragile redemption balanced between them like a coin tossed high in the air, waiting to land. The paper crumpled in his fist as he tossed the developer's offer into the dirt, the decision final not with defiance but with quiet resolve. "You stay," Frank said, voice rough but steady, layered with the acceptance that had eluded him for decades. "But this ain't just about horses. This is about all of us, learning to live with what we can't control." Luke's shoulders sagged, the tension bleeding from his frame, replaced by the slow, reluctant bloom of possibility, as Emily's hand found his, grounding them both in the reality of what lay ahead. A future rebuilt not on old scars, but new understanding. As the moon crested the horizon and the stars bled into the endless Wyoming sky, Midnight Echo settled into the paddock without rope or fence, his dark form a shadow of wildness tempered not by force, but by fragile trust. And though none of them spoke the words aloud, the quiet certainty hung heavy in the cool night air. Lone Pine Ranch had been broken before, but tonight it began to heal.